Welcome to Haunted Hospitality, Southern Stories told by Spooky Gingers. I'm Robin.
And I'm Zoe, and I have a story for you guys today. But first, Robin, how's life?
I'm doing good. So I watched Thelma and Louise this morning for the first time. Do you, get what I'm talking about?
Thelma and Louise.
Two outlaws, or two women who live normal lives who then become outlaws and drive a 1956 green Ford Thunderbird convertible around America incredibly fast.
Okay.
So I watched it, and then I drove here. And
Is it a movie or a TV show? Sorry.
It's a movie.
Okay.
Very incredibly famous movie.
Oh.
So I realized while I was driving to your house that I think, imbuing a bit too much of their energy into my driving. And I was like, whoa, Robin, hold your horses. You're not driving a Thunderbird. You're not on the run from Johnny Law. You're going to Zoe's. Anyway, but yeah, I'm doing fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm gonna drive slower on the way home.
That's good. That's good.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Zoe?
Well, Robin, I have a splinter in my foot.
Really?
Yes, I've had it for like a week or two
now.
now.
Yeah, you told me last week.
Yes.
Are you okay?
No.
You should take it out.
I tried. I literally, I used a pokey stick and
Did you use tweezers?
Yes, the tweezers were the first thing I tried to use, Robin.
I don't need that voice.
But the thing is that for doing karate for the last year, my feet are now heavily calloused. And so it's really tough and rough. And so it's like in the tough and rough part of my foot. And I've tried so many things. And now it's like a pimple essentially on the bottom of my foot. And it's gross.
We're very sorry.
I'm sorry. But it's so painful sometimes. I got up to go to the bathroom and I came back to go back to work because I work from home and Soup was in my chair. So I moved my laptop to my stand-up desk so that I didn't have to disrupt her in my chair because that's what a cat mom does. And while I was standing up, I was running my socked foot over the metal bit of my chair, my desk, that is flat, right? So I was just rubbing my foot against it absentmindedly. I didn't even notice I was doing it until I ran over the bump on my foot where their splinter is, and it felt like somebody just stabbed me in the bottom of the foot. And so I sat down, and I have a bunch of pimple picking things because I'm obsessed with the pimple poppers.
If you have maintained your way through this episode, we thank you. We thank you.
Anyway, I tried to get, long story short, I tried to get it out. It won't come out. Mm-hmm. I'm belt testing in 2 weekends, and I'm hoping it's out by then.
Okay.
Yep. Do you have a something for us?
I do.
Okay.
I do have something spooky. I'm sorry about your foot.
Thank you.
Okay. I was, going about, I was like, well, I gotta find something spooky to talk about. And I was thinking, just vampires at large. And then I was like, that's broad. That's a very broad topic. Would she let me get away with just talking about Twilight? Probably no. So then I had Googled vampires, and then Google search is sometimes here are questions related to your search. And the first one was, who was the first vampire? And I was like, what? I have literally never thought about that question because you never think of a first vampire.
Isn't it the lesbian chick?
No.
Oh.
It was a fella named Yura Grando, and that's who I'm doing my something spooky on.
Okay, tell me about Yura Grando.
The first Yura Grando.
Yura Grando.
Yura. It's not a yeah. Okay. The first vampire. There is a content warning for sexual assault.
That applies for the rest of this episode, so.
Gotcha. Okay. He was born in 1579 in Istria, which is now Croatia. Mm-hmm. He was referred to in, I think, historical documents as Strigon, which is a word they use for either vampire or sorcerer.
Okay.
So he died from natural causes in 1656, and that's really where the story begins, because shortly after he died, villagers, because they all live in the same village, villagers would see Yura Grando walking down the street, smiling. He was holding a dead sheep and a black cat.
Oh. Was the black cat dead?
It did not specify the black cat was dead. I'm going to assume it was alive. Yes. So, and everybody was like, this is weird. The priest realized that something was amiss in the village, I guess, other than
The dead man
Grando
walking.
walking around, because people would hear every now and then a knock at their door. And then soon after, like a mysterious knock, you open the door, nobody's there. And then within a few days, somebody in that household would die. Good guess.
Thank you.
And the priest was like, this has to be Euro Grando. This
Yeah.
has to be Euro Grando. And Euro Grando's widow said she saw him in her bedroom one night, smiling, and he was like gasping. He was like breathing really heavy.
Ooh.
And then he raped her.
Oh.
I know. I did not expect that
No.
from this.
I was about to make a joke about Edward staring at Bella while she's
Glad you
sleeping.
didn't make that joke.
And then you said, I was like,
Yeah, good restraint.
Thank you.
So then the priest, Giorgio, saw him once in person, held up a cross and said, "Behold Jesus Christ, you vampire, stop tormenting us." So he was calling dibs on vampire already.
Okay.
And my guess is he probably used the word Stragon, because like nobody's speaking English in this, by the way.
Right, yeah, no.
So they tried, and by they I mean villagers, tried to stab him in the chest with a hawthorn stick. But like it just bounced off his chest, it wouldn't penetrate and wouldn't do anything.
Because his skin is made of stone.
Okay. And after this, the attacks got worse. So he's killing people. I didn't see much mention of blood.
Because he was drinking it all.
I guess so. I was just wondering why go with vampire necessarily. But they did. And so he's known as the first vampire, and I'm sticking with it.
Okay.
So they tried to stab him with a stick. It did not work. Things got worse. And then in 1672, this has been going on for 16 years.
Oh, gosh.
I know. They were like, enough is enough. We're going to Euro Grando's grave. They did.
I'm sorry, they waited 16 years to go to his...
Listen, I don't know who was in charge of planning for this village. They could have gotten a little bit sooner, but they dig him up after 16 years. His corpse had not rotted one bit, and there was a smile on his face. They tried to stab him with a hawthorn stick again. I don't know why we're trying twice. It did not work. It did not go in. So then they had an axe, and they decapitated him. Yeah. And apparently when they go in for the decapitation, that is when they heard a howl throughout the cemetery.
Ooh.
And his body began to move like it was in pain.
Oh.
And then he ultimately died. And blood did come out of the wound.
Oh.
Yes.
Interesting.
That's the story of the first vampire, Euro Grando.
Thank you. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, a very interesting story. Literally never occurred to me that there was a beginning of vampire lore. I just kind of, and maybe like, I mean, obviously, I think this word existed before this guy existed, so maybe this is like the first person who we have and is like, I think this person was a vampire.
Right.
And honestly, I've never like thought about us thinking specific people are vampires. It's just like, they exist and they're in the woods, and they're not real, but except in Twilight, when they are real. And glittery.
Yes. And Dracula.
But I'm also wondering if this, because like I think I saw that Euro Grando like inspired, like the story of Euro Grando inspired like vampire fiction, like modern day vampire fiction a lot. And we've talked about Midnight Mass on this episode, or really I talked a lot about Midnight Mass, and so it was like, I'm not watching another Mike Flanagan thing, you can't make me. And there's just quite a lot that made me just draw like comparisons between Euro Grando and just this random flying devil creature in Midnight Mass. So I wonder if there's a connection there as well.
Huh.
Yeah, all right.
Well, thank you, Robin.
Yeah, do you have a story for us today?
I do, and this one is a doozy.
Do we have content warnings we need to share?
We do have content warnings. Content warnings for sexual assault, suicide, incest, child abuse, and pedophilia.
Okay.
Yeah, that it kind of checks all the boxes.
Yeah.
So if you recall, my Something Spooky for episode 47 were the last meals of death row inmates. One of those was a woman named Aileen Wuornos, who turned down a last meal and instead just asked for a single cup of coffee.
Oh, yeah, her.
Yes.
Okay.
She was a serial killer, and she has killed 7 men. I do not believe there are any more or any less.
Okay.
So I believe all 7 men that she has been tied to were the 7 men that she killed, and I don't believe she killed any more than these 7 men.
Alrighty.
Today we're going to find out what led up to that single cup of coffee. So I listed a lot of trigger warnings at the beginning of this.
You did.
Most of them come from her backstory. So Aileen was born on February 29th, 1956, so she was a leap year baby.
Mm-hmm.
She originally had the last name of Pittman, and she was born in Rochester, Michigan, but the story takes place in Florida. Aileen's parents were married when her mother, Diane Wuornos, was 14.
Ah, okay.
And her father, Leo Pittman, was 18, and they got married in 1954. The very next year, they had Aileen's brother, Keith, and then immediately got pregnant again with Aileen. 2 months before Aileen was born, Diane filed for a divorce, and Aileen never met her father because he was incarcerated in Kansas at the time of her birth for kidnapping and raping a 7-year-old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Also, there were some sources that weren't necessarily news articles that said he also abused his parents when he was growing up. So her father abused his parents growing up.
Gotcha.
He was given a life sentence in 1967, but he was found hanging in his cell January 30th, 1969, and his death was ruled a suicide. He was also diagnosed with schizophrenia prior to his conviction. However, that did not come up in court.
Mm-hmm.
So, history of mental illness, her birth situation already isn't great.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when Aileen was 4 years old, Diane, her mother, abandoned both her and Keith and left them with her grandparents, Laurie and Britta Wuornos. And Britta is the grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
I think. One of them. They're weird names. So
are these Aileen's grandparents or her great-grandparents?
Sorry, yes, you're right. Aileen's grandparents.
Okay.
Because they did end up adopting Aileen and Keith in 1960, and Aileen and Keith both grew up until she was 12, thinking that they were her parents.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there was a short enough age gap between them that she thought that they were her parents.
Yeah, and her mom was so young.
Yeah. But unfortunately, both her grandparents were alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't the best of caretakers, and I say that that's a very light way of putting it. So by 11 years old, Aileen was exchanging sexual favors in school for cigarettes, drugs, and food. She didn't have any friends, and she was prone to unpredictable outbursts of anger. She also was known to steal from her family and peers and exhibited fire-setting behaviors.
Okay.
To the point that she has a scar on the right side of her face from when she was lighting a fire with her brother Keith when she was 9.
Mm-hmm.
So she would use drugs and alcohol. She would run away frequently. When she went home, she would engage in sexual activities with Keith, her brother.
Uh-huh.
She would also be sexually assaulted by her grandfather. She was forced to strip naked and then beaten. And her grandmother would then emotionally abuse and manipulate her.
So there was just really very little chance of her being...
being mentally healthy in any way.
Yeah.
Yeah. In 1970, at the age of 14, Aileen was impregnated by her grandfather.
Oh, God. Okay.
That same source that I mentioned earlier, that wasn't exactly news, did say that some people speculated that the father could also have been a friend of her grandfather's, a neighbor, Keith, her brother, or an Elvis Presley lookalike.
Elvis Presley lookalike?
I don't know where that came from.
Okay. That I'm gonna nix out the Elvis Presley lookalike option, honestly.
Yeah. So Aileen gave birth to a boy in a maternity home for, quote, unwed mothers on March 23rd, 1971. The child was placed up for adoption immediately. Aileen had requested to see the baby after giving birth, but she wasn't even allowed to hold him before he was taken away. So she gave birth and never really got to see him or even hold him or anything. So
And she wanted to?
she had requested to hold him.
Oh, okay.
And I think that was another thing that kind of like led to a lot of this, because basically at every corner she's just being failed by the system, and she's being failed constantly, essentially. And I think that was another thing, because she kind of wanted to keep the kid, but she wasn't even given the option to.
Yeah.
So she ran away. She started hitchhiking, panhandling, and prostituting. She would return home semi-frequently, but usually would run away again soon after. She did end up dropping out of school. Then her grandmother died of liver failure, so her grandfather kicked her out at 15 years old. She's already...
Wait, all that happened before she was 15?
Yes.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That boggles the mind, honestly.
So, kicked out at 15, she survived by prostituting herself for money, food, and drugs, and lived in the woods outside her grandfather's house. And then, on May 27th, 1974, she was arrested in Jefferson County, Colorado for a DUI, disorderly conduct, and filing a .22 pistol from a moving vehicle, and then she did not appear to her court date.
Do we know anything about why she was firing the pistol?
No.
Okay.
She generally hung out with not great people, because that's what kind of her life led her to do. And so she could have been, like, firing back at someone. I don't know.
There's a million things it could be, basically.
Yes. Okay. On March 12th, 1976, so 2 years later, her grandfather died by suicide in his son's garage. Mm-hmm. She hitchhiked to Florida in 1976, that same year, but this was around June, where she met a man named Louis Fell. He was 69 years old and a yacht club president. And they were married that same year.
And she is again how old?
In 76.
I'm just wondering if she's still, like, under 18 at this point.
She's 19.
Okay.
Yeah. They got married, and then within 2 weeks of being married, Aileen grabbed Lewis's cane and beat him with it. So he got a restraining order against her. Oh, right. By the way, this was in Florida. I think I said she hitchhiked to Florida, but yeah. So she went back to Michigan after he got a restraining order against her, where she was arrested at a club called Bernie's Club for throwing a cue ball at a bartender's head. She was charged with assault and disturbing the peace, and this was July 14th, 1976. Then on July 17th, 3 days later, her brother Keith died of esophageal cancer. Aileen received $10,000 from his life insurance. Then, on July 21st, she and Louis annulled their marriage. So in a 2-month span, she ran away to Florida, got married, abused her husband, had a restraining order against her, went back to Michigan, lost her brother, got $10,000, and then had her marriage annulled.
Okay.
And she's like 19-ish.
19-ish.
Then, in the next 2 months, she spent all the money that she received from her brother's death to pay a $105 drunk driving fee that she got in August. She bought a bunch of luxuries, including a new car that she wrecked almost immediately, and she was also only 20 at this point. Oh, I'm sorry, she was 20 by now. In 1978, she attempted suicide by shooting herself in the stomach. This was the 5th time she's attempted to end her own life since the age of 14.
Really?
Yeah. And then 1 week after being discharged, she attempted to overdose on tranquilizers. Mm-hmm. So not great.
No.
On May 20th, 1981, she found herself in Florida again, and I think this is where she's pretty much staying in Florida at this point, and was arrested for armed robbery of a convenience store where she stole $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes. She was in prison between May 4th, 1982 and June 30th, 1983. When they asked her, like, why she stole just 2 packs of cigarettes and $35, she said she wanted to test her current partner, a 52-year-old man named Jay Watts. She wanted to see if he really loved her and would stay by her side, even if she was arrested. They had been dating for 2 months at this point.
Did he stay?
He cut her off immediately after she was incarcerated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, creepy that they're dating. to be quite honest. Like,
100%.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, like, psychological issues. Obviously, I don't want to read into it too much and, like, go Freudian on you. But, I mean, the men she targets and the men she ends up dating are of a similar age as her grandfather would have been.
Mm-hmm. And there's just so much erratic behavior. Like, there's so much in such short time periods. It's like, I'm trying to keep up, but it's... Her life is just moving so fast.
Yeah. I mean, in 4 months, she, like... gets $10,000, loses $10,000. I mean, if you expand it to be a little bit longer, like her grandfather, who had sexually abused her entire life, dies of suicide. Like, I mean, there's so much going on in her life.
The calmest period we've had is when she's in prison.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
So, in May 1984, she was arrested for trying to use forged checks at a bank. In November 1985, she was a suspect in a theft of a revolver and some bullets. They never arrested her for that, though. In January 1986, she was arrested in Miami for car theft, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice.
Mm-hmm.
This last one was because she had a driver's license that had her aunt's information and her photo on it, and so, like, by giving that, apparently that's obstruction of justice.
I guess so. I never really thought, like, what do you get charged for if you're using a fake ID?
Yeah, especially when they're trying to arrest you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, police did find a revolver and bullets in the car, but they did not say if it was the same gun that she was suspected of stealing prior.
Okay.
She was then, quote, detained for questioning in June 1986 after a, quote, male companion said she had pulled a gun on his car and demanded $200. And then police searched her car and found yet another revolver with ammo in the car that she was driving.
How many guns is this by this point?
4.
Okay. Okay.
A lot.
Gotcha.
In 1986, she is 30 years old now. She met a 24-year-old woman named Tyria Moore at a gay bar named Zodiac at Daytona Beach.
Mm-hmm.
They moved in together, and Tyria was working as a hotel maid, and Aileen started working as a prostitute again.
Okay.
When asked about her relationship with Tyria, Aileen said, "It was love beyond imaginable. Earthly words cannot describe how I felt about Tyria."
Okay.
Yeah. So, to be crystal clear, they are a couple.
I got that.
Yeah, no. Just wanted to make sure.
Just laying it all out, letting everybody know.
And they were roommates. On July 4th, 1987, both Tyria and Aileen were detained at a bar for questioning because they were accused of assault and battery with a beer bottle.
Okay, both of them?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think one beer... I don't know what the situation was.
Gotcha.
On March 12th, 1988, Aileen accused a bus driver of assault, saying that he pushed her off the bus after she confronted him, and Tyria was there to witness it, but they didn't really go anywhere further with that due to her history.
Okay.
So, that was all the backstory. All the petty crime that led up to her starting to murder people.
So I guess she's in her 30s when she starts to murder people.
Yes, so she was 30 in 1986, and we're going to 1989, so she's about 33.
Okay, no.
So here's her killings. On November 30th, 1989, Aileen was working, and you know what her profession is, and got into the car of 51-year-old Richard Mallory. He was a man known for disappearing from his repair business, like computer repair shop, for days to go on drinking and sex binges.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I'm laughing. I'm just thinking about somebody really needing their computer fixed and they go up there and be like, Richard, come on.
I mean, basically that would be what would happen is, like, they would show up and he would be gone and they would drop off their stuff and he would come back and he would hire somebody and the person he hires would help him get caught up to all the things that people left behind to get repaired, and then he would fire that person and then work by himself again until he goes on another binge.
You know, if this guy managed things better, he could simply own the store and hire, like, one person I really think that would have been okay with his budget based off of everything else that he's doing.
No, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm here with the computer thing again. I would not leave my computer for a random guy.
This is 1989. So
your computers are even more valuable at that point. Like, they're crappier.
Yeah.
But the fact that you have a computer,
it's pretty, yeah.
you don't leave that, like, in a little plastic bag outside the store for when the guy is back from his binge. I'm sorry, you don't.
Yeah, no. And honestly, I don't think I'd be taking my computer to a man who is known for going on drug, alcohol, and sex binges. Just saying.
I'm just thinking about what a store could be named. I'm sorry. Okay, you should just continue on. Oh, no. Oh, shoot.
He's a victim.
Shoot. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine.
Didn't.
Of all the victims, he's the shittiest, so...
Okay, just tell me what happens.
I honestly think he's the trigger for her starting to kill people.
Okay.
So, he drove Aileen to an abandoned area after soliciting her, and Aileen stated that he beat and raped and sodomized her.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she therefore found a gun in his car and shot him several times, including 2 shots that ended up embedding themselves into his left lung, and those were the 2 shots that killed him. Mm-hmm. So she left his body several miles away in a wooded area wrapped in a carpet runner, like the kind that's on the bottom of your car floor.
Yeah.
And left his car in the same parking lot and went home. They did find his body a few days later, and he was identified by his fingerprints because this is Florida, and it's hot and humid in Florida, and so bodies decompose a lot faster. So there's going to be a couple times where I mentioned, like, they found the body within a couple days, but they could not identify them by their face.
Gotcha. So by this point, that was self-defense is what I'm reading that as.
Yes, that was self-defense.
Okay.
Yes. It wasn't until police found his car 2 days later that people around him grew concerned because he wouldn't have left his car behind when he was going on these sex binges. And then on December 13th, 2 men looking for scrap metal along a dirt road found his body. Mm-hmm. So his body was found on December 13th and he went missing November 30th.
Okay. So like 2 weeks.
Yeah. Initially, police suspected a stripper who went by the name Chastity, which is just a hilarious name for a stripper, first of all.
I feel like that's the stripper name I hear most often in, like, TV shows.
But it's spelled chastity.
Like
titty.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm sorry. She had told her boyfriend that she had gone out to party with Richard and had killed him. But police, like, investigated, and she's like, oh, no, I just said that to make my boyfriend panic, essentially. Like, they were in an argument, and she's like, I killed Richard Mallory.
People just stop with the fake confessions.
I know.
They make things so confusing.
Well, I
don't get why people do this.
I think she said that to make him angry, and then the boyfriend went to the police.
Good, that's what you should do.
And said she confessed that, but then she was like, wait, I didn't think he would go to the police. I thought he would just, like, take my word for it. I don't know.
Yeah, he took your word for it, and he went to the police. He wasn't, like, saying, did she really do this? He was like, yo. She did this.
I could be reading into the situation a little bit, but it felt like he went to the police just to be like, oh, you're saying that you killed him? Well, I'm gonna tell the police, kind of thing.
What kind of fights do these people have?
Honestly.
I
don't know. She was a stripper in the 80s and 90s. Like,
I'm not hating on that.
No,
I am not hating on
but
that.
I imagine, like, that's a very complex place to be.
Yeah.
Because people were way more misogynistic back then than they are today. I mean, they're still misogynistic. Mm-hmm. But, like...
We would probably be a little bit shocked if we went into one of those. Just based off the treatment that was going on in there.
Right.
In the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Which we didn't.
No.
Because we were babies.
Didn't exist yet at this point, honestly.
Okay, fine, but 90s.
So, yes. So, they found out that she was just trying to make her boyfriend mad. Richard's case went cold. Then, on May 19th, 1990... David Spears, who was a 47-year-old man, went missing. He was on his way to Orlando for work, but he did not make it. He was found naked on June 1st off Route 19 north of Tampa, and he was shot 6 times by a .22 pistol, and a used condom was near his body. His truck was found shortly after, missing the plates and unlocked, but it was on Interstate 75 in a completely different county.
So, I guess if she did this, I'm assuming.
Yes, she did confess to this later.
Okay, so she just took the truck to get out of there.
Yeah. So I'll go into it more later, but at this point, I think she perceived it as self-defense, but I don't know if this one was self-defense. It's kind of like a situation where it's like, we're all 7 cases self-defense. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I believe she perceived it as self-defense.
Okay.
So
I'm with you.
yeah. So it's a complicated situation because she is a prostitute. They're hiring her as a prostitute.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so she's already in this situation, but I mean, clearly you can still be a prostitute in this situation and be raped. Very, very clearly. But then you do have like the 7 killed, shot victims.
Right. So it's a hairy situation, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
And basically, we just can't know what went on.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Especially since the men end up dying and they can't say their side of the story. And she also goes back and forth a couple times. So that doesn't really. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, yes, his body was found. His truck was found. He was killed on May 19th. His body was found on June 1st. On May 31st, Charles Karskadon, who was 40, was seen with Aileen, and then he went missing. Then on June 6th, 1990, his body was found naked but wrapped in an electric blanket. He was shot 9 times with a .22 caliber gun. He was found off of Interstate 75. He was badly decomposed by the point so that they could not get fingerprints or estimate his time of death. Originally, he was declared a John Doe, but when they found his car and they noticed how similar the case was to David Spears, they were able to positively identify him as Charles Karskadon. So they found the missing car. I just want to really quick explain that a little bit better. But they found the missing car that was registered to Charles Karskadon. They realized how his body was very similar to David Spears' body and how the cars went both missing.
Oh, okay.
And so that's where they're like, well, this is a very similar case. The car we have and the body we have probably go together. This is Charles Karskadon.
So this was like, they were linking these murders together by this point.
At this point, they did link David Spears' murder and Charles Karskadon's case, but at this point, they did not link Richard Mallory's case.
Who was the first guy?
Yes.
Okay.
Mostly because these are happening in different counties. So Florida has a lot of different counties, and at this point, there wasn't like really the inter-county communication going on.
Yeah.
That is aided by technology that we have today. So it does take a little bit for all the people to get on board.
That's how like Ted Bundy was not caught for so long and then was caught because everybody was like, wait 1 second. This is similar to over here.
Right.
And then you open those ways of communication and then you're also like putting together all these evidence. Sorry, I'm running on, but yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. And even when they arrested her, they weren't aware of a couple of the cases too. So it was kind of like, oh crap, you know. The next one is in June 1990. Peter Sims, I believe is how his name's pronounced. It's Siems. Symes, maybe?
Seems? I don't know.
But Peter Sims, 65 years old, left Jupiter, Florida for Arkansas, but he did not arrive at his destination. On July 4th, 1990, his abandoned car was found in Orange Springs, but the body was never found. His car had smashed glass, bloodstains throughout the interior, and the license plate was missing. I'm going to get a little bit more into his car and how it got into that condition a little bit later. His car is really what brings this whole case together.
Okay.
So Troy Bress, 50 years old, was reported missing July 31st, 1990 when he was on a delivery route. He did not return at the end of the day, so his boss called around and discovered he had not made his last deliveries. His boss, Johnny May, then went out with her husband at night looking for him, and Troy's wife declared him missing at 2 a.m. His car was then found at 4 a.m. unlocked, and then 5 days later,
Oh my God.
5 days. 5 days. 5 days later, a family out for a picnic at the Ocala National Forest found his body in a clearing off of Highway 19, 8 miles away from where his car was. He was unable to be identified immediately.
Oh, man.
But his wife recognized his wedding ring and was able to identify him that way.
Real quick, I would like to say good job on the boss and the family for being very proactive. I thought that was a really quick response.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. They didn't assume he just, like, went off somewhere. Like,
no, they were like, and they called around to figure out when he went missing in terms of his route. Just
right.
Good for them.
Right. He had been shot twice with a .22 caliber gun, once in the back, once in the chest. Mm-hmm. So I am going to bring a brief aside here. So at this point, they're thinking it's a hitchhiker that did it, but later they do figure out it was Aileen. And I cannot imagine the anguish I would feel after finding out that my husband was killed when he was trying to solicit a prostitute.
Yeah.
Because it's not the prostitute part that gets me, it's the cheating part.
No, yeah. Very clearly. We're being very clear about that. Yeah, because, I mean, you are grieving.
Right, your husband just died.
And your grieving does not stop just because you realized he died in the process of cheating on you.
Right.
But I'm sure it is affected and transforms, and then anger, and then I'm assuming I'm reading into this a whole bunch of ways in terms of emotion, but then guilt over the anger, and then just I feel very bad for that woman. Just a horrible situation to be in.
And just like the poetic part of it, of her identifying him by his wedding ring.
When you said that, I was like, oh no.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh. And granted, there's no evidence on this one on if he was just giving her a ride or if he was soliciting her, but my brain would automatically go there. Knowing, you know?
And if you didn't know for sure, that almost makes it worse.
Because it's like you don't want to think ill of your husband, but, I mean, you have to be a little bit naive to not think that.
I hope she found peace.
Yeah, I really hope she found peace, too. Let's see, he was 50 in 1990. I mean, she could still be alive. No, she would be like 100 if she was around the same age as him.
No, she would not be 100. She'd be 75. She'd be like 72.
1990?
She'd be 82.
Sorry, that was 30. I was thinking that was 50 years ago. That's weird.
She'd be 82.
Yeah, she would be 82. Okay. Yeah. So she could still be alive. I hope she found peace.
Me too.
So initially, police suspected a, quote, drifter named Curtis Blankenship, who was hitchhiking on the highway, the same highway he went missing on. And he was picked up that same day near Troy's abandoned car. But it became clear that Curtis was not involved and the case went cold. Charles Humphreys, 56, was killed on September 11th, 1990. He was heading home from work as a protective investigator specializing in abused and injured children, which is just, like, ironic.
Yeah.
Because he was kind of the person she needed when she was younger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he had just celebrated his 35th wedding anniversary the day before with his wife, and his body was found the next day on September 12th, fully clothed, but shot 6 times in the head and torso and once on his wrist. His car was found later that month.
I don't think we should necessarily, especially as, like, for the later ones too, that we should necessarily be thinking, like, they were all having sex with, like, I don't know, like, just, it's very possible that, like, how she entered into, I think it's very possible that her, like, MO that we might not know from the outside, but she would know, could have changed during this time.
Right.
Because he was fully clothed.
Right. She could have, like, it could have been a situation where he saw her, asked her if she needed help going anywhere, because he was previously a police officer. He was known for helping people, things like that. So he could have seen a woman on the side of the road who needed help and was going to ask her to help. And she could have, through PTSD and paranoia, thought he was about to attack her.
She could have. And then the other thing is, we know what she is saying. We don't actually know what was going through her mind.
Exactly.
She could very well, I mean, at this point, she is murdering people in cold blood. Mm-hmm. She could be lying about her motives behind that.
Right. It's
just a sticky situation. And I feel for, like, her past and all that she's been through, because that is, like, overwhelming.
I'm completely sympathetic to her. However, she's killing people.
She's killing people
and needs to be stopped.
Lot. Yeah.
And keep in mind, This is all 1 year.
I realized you kept repeating 1990.
Yeah.
I was like, wait 1 second. We're still... Okay.
We're still in 1990.
We're still here.
Yeah. So all 7 killings happened in 1990.
Wait.
Oh,
what?
well, actually, the first one was November 1989, but...
I really did miss that.
Yeah. So
Okay.
every single one of these... The first one was 89, and the rest have been 1990.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it's 7... I mean, the last one's November 1990, so it's 7 men in...
In essentially one year. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So the next one is Walter Antonio. He was 62 years old. He was found November 19th, 1990, off of a logging trail. He was naked and shot 5 times. Investigators say that he was found less than 24 hours after he had died, and nobody had a chance to report him missing yet. He was a trucker, so it didn't really... Like, nobody would have reported him missing quite yet, though there wasn't really much information to go on as to what was happening that led up to his death.
Yeah.
So they did find his car 5 days later. Captain Steve Vinegar, which is like vinegar but with a B, was the commander of the Marion County Sheriff's Criminal Investigation Division, and he knew about the similarities between several of the deaths, and he felt like they were a little bit too similar. So he formed a multi-agency task force. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing about Walter Antonio. He was also formerly a police officer.
Okay.
Yes. So the last 2 were formerly police officers. And I think
yeah.
they were both relatively high-ranking. Mm-hmm. So in his theory, Captain Steve Vinegar's theory, when he developed this multi-agency task force, was that nobody picks up hitchhikers anymore because they're dangerous. So he assumed that the hitchhikers or the people getting into the cars had to be women.
I think people still pick up hitchhikers.
I think at this point, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, no, 70s, 80s, and 90s was a serial killer era.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I see the reasoning behind it. Sorry.
And even now, I think fewer people pick up hitchhikers than they did once upon a time.
I would never pick up a hitchhiker.
Yeah, not unless I knew them.
No offense to hitchhikers, because I think there's something very, like, by romantic, I think, like, dreamy about that, like, the whole life vibe thing.
Right.
But no, I'm not letting a stranger into my car.
And also, I would never go hitchhiking.
I would also never get into... I would never get into a stranger's car, and yet I'm like, Uber, please pick me up.
Well, at least there's, like, some sort of identification there, you know?
You know, they lean out, and they're like, are you Robin? I'm like, how do you know?
Yeah.
And I get in.
Yeah.
I'm not that bubbly, I'm sorry. I'm nice.
So, yes, so he assumed that whoever the criminal or criminals are, they had to be women. So, what really started the case to catch Aileen was a woman named Rhonda Bailey. Remember how I told you that the car of Peter Sims was found, like, broken and bloody?
Yeah.
Aileen had stolen the cars of all the men that she had killed and kept them for as long as she could before abandoning them in various parking lots or on the side of the road or whatever. Because when she found out that the bodies were found or whatever, or they were reported missing, she would abandon the car. That way she wouldn't be found. But she needed a car, so she would just take their cars. However, with Peter Sims' car, she had to abandon the car early when she was in a car accident with Tyria.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So they ran into the bushes in front of the house of a woman named Rhonda Bailey. She witnessed the accident while sitting on her porch and gave a description of the 2 women that she saw fleeing the scene. They had run from the car, threw beer cans into the woods, and yelled at each other. Tyria said little, but Aileen, who was hurt, begged Rhonda not to call the police. They got back into the car, moved it out of the brush, and moved it a little bit down the road, but the car failed, and so they got out and walked away. Rhonda, at this point, was a little suspicious, so she did end up calling the police. And that's when the police discovered that it was Peter Sims' car, and they got a description of the woman from Rhonda Bailey. Captain Vinegar's task force believed that if they could find the 2 women who crashed the car, they could tie them to the other killings. Because in his point of view, if they were in Peter Sims' car, they were the ones who killed Peter Sims. Mm-hmm. And so he was hoping that he could tie them to the other killings and just arrest them. So their descriptions were aired on TV in a media campaign to locate them, saying that they were dangerous people. Leads came pouring in from all around everywhere, blaming various sisters and cousins. But
yeah, people, like, it's so interesting how many people just think, like, oh, you're talking about my family member or my boyfriend.
Yeah.
Okay, again, Ted Bundy
was found by his girlfriend, right? She reported him like 3 times.
She reported him, and so many women called in and were like, you're looking for a killer? I think he's my boyfriend. Like, I'm sorry, if you think your boyfriend is a killer, it does not matter if he is or not. I mean, it does, but, like, dump him.
Yeah, unless you
think
you're gonna get killed if you dump him.
Oh my god, that's such that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, you're
Unrelated.
good.
Get back.
So, of these leads, several tips described 2 women named Tyria Moore and Aileen Lee.
Oh, okay, thank you.
On paper, it's like, oh, bloop, bloop, you can really tie it. But Aileen is so different from Lee that it's just, I didn't hear it either. Anyway, sorry. They were able to find a person that also said that the 2 women, Tyria Moore and Lee, worked at her motel, but they were named Tyria Moore and Susan Blahovec. Then another caller said that the sketches looked like Tyria Moore and Lee Blahovec. So they're like, okay, we have Tyria Moore in 3 locations and a Susan Blahovec and a Lee Blahovec.
Okay, so
with Tyria. So they're like, that's probably the same person.
Mm-hmm.
So the police began tracking their movements. They stayed at a motel where Lee was registered as Cammie Marsh Green.
So we're talking about Aileen.
Aileen, yes.
Is there a reason we're going by Lee now?
Because that was her fake name when everybody was talking to her.
Okay.
So police didn't know her as Aileen yet.
Okay.
So they were calling her Lee. I'm sorry. I know it's confusing.
You're just like,
because
Lee
there's now
is staying there under a pseudonym, and I'm like, wait 1 second. I thought Lee was the pseudonym.
Lee is the pseudonym,
Okay.
but it's the only name that the police know her as.
Okay.
So
I'm with you.
So in early December, they both left, but Lee returned alone until December 10th. They ran the names and they found that there was... So they got the IDs from the motel, basically. They went up to the motel and they said, hey, hush, hush, don't tell them because we're staking them out. They wanted to collect more evidence before they arrested them.
Yeah.
But they said, can you please give us the driver's license or like the copies of the driver's licenses? So the motel gave them the copies of the driver's licenses and the police ran them. And Tyria Moore had a dropped breaking and entering record, I don't know, charge on her record.
Mm-hmm.
But Blahovec, so Lee Blahovec or Susan Blahovec, I don't know which one.
Aileen.
Well, the specific name, Blahovec, had a trespassing arrest, and the name Green had no record, but neither name matched the woman that they were tracking.
Okay.
I know.
Okay.
So they kept tracking the driver's license that was given to the motel. That was Cammie Green's ID. And they found that her ID was used when selling a camera and a radar detector to a pawn shop. And apparently in Florida, at least at that time, when you sold anything to a pawn shop, you had to leave behind a thumbprint on the receipt.
Clever.
Yeah. So that's like a thing with pawn shops at that time, at least.
Well, so you can't like get rid of... So in case, like, you just stole it, I guess, and
yeah,
you're reselling it.
Then they have your thumbprint.
That is clever.
Yep. So Cammie Green's ID was used to sell these items, and she left a thumbprint. These items belonged to Richard Mallory, the first victim.
Okay.
She also pawned a set of tools that matched the description of items missing from David Spears' truck, who was the second victim that they realized was tied to the other cases. They also found Charles Carskadon's gun pawned off by the same person in a different pawn shop.
I'd say that's pretty darn good connection there.
Yeah, I would say. And all of them had a fingerprint that matched each other. So not only did the fingerprints on all 3 items match each other, but there was also a palm print in Peter Sims' car that the fingerprint matched.
All right.
And Aileen was seen leaving Peter Sims' car.
Okay, I'd say we're pretty well linked to the crime.
Yeah, but they still want more evidence, okay?
Because I guess at this point it's just that she stole the cars, not quite that you can prove that she killed them. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a major coincidence that she just happened to rob all the things of these men who all died. Yeah.
Yes,
No.
yes.
But we're about to throw another name in there, I'm sorry. So the fingerprint along with the palm print that was found in Peterson's car were connected to a woman named Lori Grody. They sent Lori Grody's prints to the National Crime Information Center, and more reports came back from Michigan, Colorado, and Florida. Lori Grody, Susan Blahovec, Lee, and Cammie Green were all discovered to be aliases. I'm sorry. For Aileen Wuornos. Yay! We finally got there. So now the police know what name they're looking for.
Okay.
Now I can go back to saying Aileen.
I'm just thinking, like, your research for that section must have just been so hellish.
It's
like,
great.
I'm sorry, which name? Which name is it? Okay.
Especially since there was a Lee Blahovec and a Susan Blahovec. And then newspapers always refer to people as their last name. And I'm like, okay, Blahovec Lee or Blahovec It was fun.
We appreciate you.
I appreciate me too.
I love that.
I'm a Leo.
I appreciate myself too.
Okay, good.
Good.
Yeah. So, Eileen's fingerprints were recorded because of her criminal record in Florida. And police were finally able to start the real hunt to find her. So I was going to, because this is already pretty kind of lengthy, so I was going to skip over how she was caught, just saying like, oh, she was found at this bar and da-da-da, right? 2 police officers went undercover as drug dealers named Bucket and Drums.
Guys.
Yeah.
I don't know. That seems obvious to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the whole plan was that Bucket and Drums were going to go to bars that they believed Aileen would go to.
Okay.
And familiarize themselves with her, like get to know her, talk to her, and get her to trust them. Mm-hmm. And this would span over a period of weeks until they can like
she's actively killing people, guys. Y'all can be a bit quicker about this.
Well, she used so many aliases that they had to make sure they had the right person.
Okay.
So I guess they were trying to get her to trust them and like say, I don't know. They were also trying to keep it low key, so they were trying to be like, hey, you want to get a ride to this other place? Well, we'll take you there. And their plan was to just take her to prison, right?
I would not get in the car with Bucket and Drums.
So the first night she didn't get in the car with Bucket and Drums.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the second night they met her at the Last Resort biker bar.
It's called the Last Resort?
Yes, it's called the Last Resort. And so they met her there, and they were like, hey, how you doing? Saw you yesterday. We're drug dealers named Bucket and Drums. Do you want to go clean up at our motel? You, a person who has been regularly raped your entire life?
Wait, clean up?
Yeah, like, I mean, she was dirty. She was living in a motel, I mean, on the run, murdering people.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, okay. And what was her response to that?
Yes, sure, that works. So she left with them, and I think Bucket and Drums, weren't clued in on the situation, but when they left the Last Resort biker bar, they were met with police, and so they arrested her there.
Okay.
So they had planned on taking her back to the motel, where they would figure out another way to arrest her, I guess. But they ended up arresting her on the spot, rather than bringing her to a motel first. She was arrested on January 9th, 1991, outside the Last Resort biker bar, but she was arrested for an outstanding warrant against Lori Grody, which is one of the aliases. I'm so sorry. They didn't want to accuse her of anything related to the murders, and they didn't want to release to the news that they caught the murderer until they found Tyria Moore.
Okay.
So they arrested her on the grounds of Lori Grody, but they wanted to look for Tyria Moore. Mm-hmm. They found her in Pennsylvania, and she agreed to she was staying with a sibling, so it wasn't really hard to find her once they had her record. Mm-hmm. But she agreed to convince Aileen to confess to the crimes in exchange for her own immunity. Mm-hmm. Tyria said that when Aileen had killed Richard Mallory, she had confessed to what she did to Tyria, but Tyria made her shut up and not say anything else. Aileen would come home after killing, and Tyria would know by the way she acted that something had happened, but she refused to listen to anything Aileen would say about it because she wanted to live in denial.
Yeah.
Because she did truly love Aileen.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't one thing that in this, I do believe they truly loved each other.
Yeah.
And
there's no reason to doubt it.
Yeah. It must hurt for Aileen to know that Tyria betrayed her like that, you know?
I guess so. Yeah.
But Tyria said that Aileen had promised never to hurt her, but she was afraid. She said, quote, "You can't believe her, so I don't know what she would have done."
Yeah.
Which completely makes sense.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I can see that would be terrifying. Like if you knew the person you were with was actually killing people, but scared to leave because they could find you, scared to say anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tyria was placed in a motel in Florida, and she made continuous phone calls to Aileen, begging her to confess so Tyria won't be blamed. Aileen confessed on January 16th, 1991, 3 days after Tyria's first call.
Okay.
Aileen claimed that all 7 murders, which took place between November 1989 and November 1990, were self-defense, and that all men had attempted to rape her. This is a really bad bullet point to follow that previous bullet point, but I'm sorry, I had to mention it because it's something that happened, but I don't have the time to go into it right now because this is already a long episode.
What is it?
A woman named Arlene Prale, 44, saw Aileen's story in the newspaper and legally adopted her November 1991 because she was an evangelical Christian, and she saw Aileen's story and said she just needs Jesus, so adopted Aileen and began preaching to Aileen and basically trying to make her a born-again Christian, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Couldn't go into more detail than that because we're pretty lengthy already.
All right.
So, on January 14th, 1992, Aileen went to trial for killing Richard Mallory. Typically, prior convictions are inadmissible in criminal trials in Florida. However, the prosecution was allowed to bring the evidence related to her other crimes into the courtroom to show a pattern of illegal activity.
Okay.
Also, Tyria testified against her, which did not help her case. As for the defense, psychiatrists testified that she was mentally unstable and had borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. They also brought up that Richard Mallory had been previously convicted of attempted rape and served time in a maximum security correctional facility and was diagnosed with strong sociopathic trends. But the judge refused to allow those records to be admitted as evidence.
Okay.
He also denied Aileen's request for a retrial. So that's another reason why I believe Richard did rape Aileen and was probably the trigger for this. However, obviously it wasn't his fault that she ended up killing 6 other men.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was found guilty on January 27th, and 4 days later she was sentenced to death. On March 31st, 1992, she pleaded no contest to the murders of Charles Humphreys, Troy Barres, and David Spears. She said that she wanted to, quote, get right with God, end quote, and she also said, quote, I wanted to confess to you that Richard Mallory did violently rape me, as I have told you, but the others did not. They only began to start to, end quote.
Okay.
Which is another thing that makes me think that she perceived it, even if it didn't necessarily happen, because she does have PTSD, you know, like...
I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
And I just can't really speculate about what happened with those other guys.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. So on May 15th, 1992, she was given 3 more death sentences.
Mm-hmm.
In June, she pleaded guilty to the murder of Charles Carskadon and received her 5th death sentence in November. In February 1193, according to my notes, but probably 1993.
Whoa, time travel.
She pleaded guilty to the murder of Walter Antonio and got another death sentence. Mm-hmm. However, no charges were brought against her for the death of Peter Sims, since his body was never found. But most consider this to be one of her killings, since her handprint was found in the car and she was seen leaving it.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, Peter Sim's car, which was like the piece that started the path to draw all these killings together, of course, they couldn't even find justice for him, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But in a way, he found justice for other people, and I hope that was helpful to his family.
That's true. That's true. And, I mean, at least you kind of know
Right.
what happens.
Even if she was never found guilty, you know.
You know. And everybody kind of knows.
Yes. Aileen retold the stories of what happened several times, but she changed it regularly. Sometimes she said that they all planned to rape her. Sometimes they said that she was robbing them and didn't want to leave a witness. However, when she was interviewing with a man named Nick Broomfield, who was a filmmaker and doing a documentary for her, when she
For her or on her?
On her, sorry.
Okay.
When she thought the cameras were all off, she did say all of them were in self-defense, but she was tired of being on death row, which she was for 10 years at this point, and that she wanted to die.
Okay.
She was assessed using the psychopathy checklist.
Psychopathy?
Yeah, probably psychopathy. The psychopathy checklist.
We should want to have like a montage.
You can't say reservoir, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry.
She scored a 32 out of 40, and 30 was the cutoff score for determining
So if you're above 30.
Yes.
Okay.
So she passed, failed, depending on how you look at it.
I guess so.
She appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1996, and she was denied. She petitioned the Florida Supreme Court in 2001 so that she could dismiss her legal counsel and terminate all pending appeals. So her lawyers wanted her to plead like insanity and stuff like that, and she's like, no, just let me die.
Okay.
Yeah. In her petition, she wrote, quote, I killed those men, robbed them cold as ice, and I'd do it again, too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again, end quote.
Okay. That's honestly so chilling to hear.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think this kind of goes back to she just wants to die at this point.
Yeah, she is definitely motivated by...
So I do think that she's saying whatever she needs to say to just get killed already. Because she's been on death row for years at this point. Aileen did feel tortured in jail. She accused the prison of tainting her food with dirt, spit, and pee. She claimed she overheard prison guards discussing pushing her to the brink so she would kill herself, or they planned on raping her. She said that they constantly did strip searches, purposely tightened her handcuffs too much, frequently looked into her window with a flashlight, and gave her less than sanitary conditions, and they had general contempt towards her. So she was interviewed on TV and said, quote, you sabotaged my ass. Society and the cops and the system. A raped woman got executed and was used for books and movies and shit. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass, end quote. Because there were books and papers and movies and docuseries coming out about her.
Yeah.
Finally, on October 9th, 2002, she was executed. She declined her last meal for a cup of coffee instead, and her last words were, quote, yes, I would like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back, end quote.
I've never seen the movie Independence Day. Is that a reference?
I don't think so. I have seen Independence Day, but I know it happens on July 4th, but I think maybe it goes 2 days. I don't know, but I think it's July 4th. The whole thing is one day, I think.
Okay.
It might be 2 days, but still. And then also the Jesus thing, and
yeah,
I think she's just not well.
Yeah.
So Aileen was then cremated and scattered beneath a tree in Michigan where she was born by a childhood friend. At her request, a song called Carnival by Natalie Merchant was played at her funeral, and when Natalie Merchant learned this, she also gave the Broomfield guy permission to use her song at the end credits scene in his documentary about her.
Okay.
Which is poetic.
It is.
The documentary, by the way, is Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer. I did not watch it. There's also a 2003 movie called Monster, starring Charlize Theron.
Charlize Theron?
Yeah, that one. As Aileen, that won her an Academy Award for Best Actress.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, I'll have to see that. I like Charlize Theron.
And just letting you know, it's not completely factual.
Oh, well, I mean, it's a fiction movie.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Thank you for sharing and for all your research and for all your knowledge of these many names.
Oh, yeah. This was a situation, I think we've mentioned it on the podcast before, where it's like, I just had to stop reading at one point. At a certain point, I just said, I'm sorry, I'm not adding anything else to these notes, even though I had like 30 more sources to go through.
There's like a certain point, like some of these more well-known ones, you could really go on for forever if you wanted to. But two, like, I also feel like in our research, we get to a certain point where we just like look at what we have and you have to realize, oh, this is complete.
This is enough. Yeah. Like, I could have gone into the actual murders a little bit more. I could have gone into the people behind that were killed. I could have gone into that whole adoption series a little bit more.
But we also have a podcast that has a set... we have a general amount of time that we try to stick to.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again for all your research and for telling this story to us. If you like today's episode... we need a better transition into that.
Yeah.
But if you like today's episode, please rate, review, tell a friendo, and subscribe. And also join our Patreon at patreon.com/hauntedhospitality. For a $3 tier every month, we give you a new episode.
Yes, and that episode comes out on the 13th because we're spooky.
Yeah.
If you want to see my sources, you can go to hauntedhospitality.wordpress.com, and everything is there. And if you have your own spooky story, whether that be true crime or supernatural, you can write to us at hauntedhospitalitypodcast@gmail.com or send us a DM.
Yes, we are on socials. You can find us on Twitter at Haunted Host. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Haunted Hospitality. We hope to see you there.
Stay spooky!